I had been searching for the perfect home for nearly a year before finding this place. Oak Ridge Estates promised everything I wanted: manicured lawns, elegant homes set back from quiet streets, and most importantly, a sense of security and calm. After 2 decades as head of security operations for elite private communities and Fortune 500 executives, I was ready for some peace of my own. The moving process was straightforward. My furniture arrived. I arranged my home office. I organized my small library of security textbooks and procedural manuals. On day 3, I installed a smart doorbell camera, nothing flashy, just a standard model that would allow me to monitor deliveries and visitors. It was a habit from my professional life that I brought into my personal space. In my line of work, situational awareness was not paranoia, it was prudence. I did not think twice about it. The device was unobtrusive, directed only at my own property, and completely in line with modern home security practices. If anything, it enhanced community safety. Many of my neighbors had similar systems installed. At least, that is what I thought until I met Karen. The confrontation came exactly 4 days after installation. I was trimming the small hedge that separated my front yard from the sidewalk when her shadow fell across the grass. I looked up to see a woman in her 50s, arms crossed tightly over a pastel cardigan. Her blonde hair was cut in that distinctive angular style that seemed specifically designed for asking to speak to managers. "Excuse me, but you cannot have that here," she said without introduction, pointing toward my front door. I straightened up, pruning shears still in hand. "I am sorry, have what?" "That camera, that surveillance device. It is a direct violation of the Homeowners Association bylaws," she stated, her voice carrying the absolute certainty of someone who believed rules existed specifically for her to enforce. I kept my expression neutral. "I do not believe it violates any rules. It only captures footage of my own property." Karen's mouth tightened into a thin line. "I am on the board. I know the rules. Section 7.4 clearly states no alterations to the front facade without approval. Did you get approval? No, you did not." She pulled out a small handbook from her purse, waving it like it contained ancient wisdom. I noticed she did not actually open it to show me the clause she referenced. "I would be happy to review the specific regulation," I offered calmly. "And if necessary, I can submit a formal request, but doorbell cameras are standard security features in most homes today." "It is not about security," Karen snapped. "It is about privacy. Your camera faces the street. It captures people walking by. It captures my house across the way. I do not consent to being recorded every time I leave my front door." This was factually incorrect. The camera had a limited field of view that captured my porch and a small portion of my walkway, nothing more. I tried to explain this. "If you would like, I can show you exactly what the camera sees. There is no view of your property at all." "I do not need to see anything," she interrupted, her voice rising. "The fact is, you moved in and immediately started violating our community standards. This is a respectable neighborhood. We do not spy on each other here." 2 older couples walking by slowed their pace, clearly eavesdropping on our conversation. Karen noticed them and seemed to stand taller, performing for her audience. "Either you remove it by tomorrow, or I will be bringing this up formally with the board," she declared loudly. "We have procedures for residents who refuse to comply with our rules." Without waiting for my response, she turned and walked away, making a point to smile and wave at the neighbors who had been watching. I remained still, pruning shears in hand, already sensing the whispered conversations that would follow. This was not about a camera. This was about power and territory. That evening, I noticed the change immediately. A neighbor who had greeted me cheerfully that morning now hurried inside when I waved. Another crossed to the opposite side of the street rather than pass by my house directly. Something had shifted. Karen had been busy. I sat at my desk that night and opened a fresh document on my computer. At the top, I typed, "Oak Ridge Estates Incident Log." Below, I recorded every detail of my interaction with Karen, including time, date, exact quotes, and the names of neighbors who had witnessed it. 20 years of security work had taught me the value of documentation. I did not know it yet, but this would become my most important weapon. The community message board notification appeared on my phone the next morning. I had joined the neighborhood chat group during my first week, hopping to learn about local events and connect with my new neighbors. Instead, I found myself scrolling through a thread titled "Security Concerns in Oak Ridge." The post, authored by Karen Williams, now I had her last name, detailed how a new resident has installed unauthorized surveillance equipment that was capturing footage of our children, our homes, and our private activities without consent. She claimed to have approached the individual reasonably, but was met with hostility and refusal. Comments accumulated rapidly beneath her post. Most were expressions of concern and outrage from residents who clearly had not seen my camera or spoken to me directly. A few questioned whether this was really an issue, but Karen quickly responded to each skeptic with additional misinformation, claiming my camera had special lenses that could see through windows. One comment caught my attention. If this is true, the board needs to act immediately. This is exactly why we have bylaws. The author was Thomas Harrington, HOA president. Karen had responded with a simple, already on it, Tom. I added these details to my incident log, including screenshots of the entire conversation thread. I considered posting a response but decided against it. In my experience, public defensiveness often appeared like guilt to outside observers. Instead, I would wait and respond formally when necessary. The official notice arrived that afternoon, slipped under my door while I was on a conference call. It was printed on HOA letterhead, citing a violation of community aesthetic standards, Section 7.4, though interestingly, it did not quote the actual text of this regulation. The letter demanded removal of all unauthorized recording devices within 72 hours or face potential fines of $100 per day. I folded the letter carefully and added it to my growing file. The rapid escalation was interesting. Most HOAs had procedural requirements, verbal warnings, formal hearings, appeal processes. This immediate jump to written demands suggested something irregular in their process. Over the next few days, I watched through my windows as Karen made her rounds. She walked slowly past my house at least twice daily, often stopping to take photos with her phone. She engaged neighbors in long conversations while pointing toward my property. The social freeze deepened. People averted their eyes when I checked my mail. Invitations to the neighborhood cookout mysteriously never reached my inbox. The situation reached a new level of absurdity on Saturday morning. From my home office window, I watched Karen and 3 other women marching up and down the sidewalk in front of my house, carrying hastily made signs reading, "Stop the surveillance" and "Privacy, not paranoia." A genuine protest, complete with thermoses of coffee and lawn chairs set up across the street for when they needed breaks. I documented it all, including the curious fact that HOA President Thomas Harrington drove by twice during their protest, waving supportively each time. The connection between them seemed more personal than professional. That evening, I researched the HOA board structure, finding that Karen held the ambiguous title of Community Standards Liaison, a position not mentioned in the official bylaws I had received when purchasing the home. The next morning, I checked my doorbell camera footage from overnight. There was Karen standing at the edge of my property at 11:37 p.m., staring at my house for nearly 5 minutes before leaving. This was no longer about a doorbell camera. This was harassment, plain and simple. I continued my silence. I documented everything, and I decided that the time for revealing my professional background was drawing closer, but not quite yet. There was more to uncover about this neighborhood's power dynamics. The note appeared on my windshield exactly 3 weeks after I moved in, printed in bold red letters. "Your intimidation, TACTICS, will not work here. Remove the camera or face, CONSEQUENCES." No signature, but the handwriting matched samples of Karen's writing I had seen on community bulletin board notices. I carefully placed the note in a plastic sleeve and added it to my expanding documentation file. That evening, I reviewed the footage from my doorbell camera. At 5:47 a.m., there was Karen hunched over in the pre-dawn darkness, slipping the note under my wiper blade before hurrying away like she was executing a covert operation. The irony was not lost on me. The very camera she wanted removed had captured her trespassing on my property. I noted in my log how the situation had evolved from bureaucratic harassment to potential criminal behavior. 2 nights later, my camera alerted me to motion at the front of my house. It was 10:13 p.m. There was Karen again, standing partially concealed behind the large oak tree near my driveway. She was holding her phone, apparently taking photos of my home in the darkness. She remained there for nearly 7 minutes before a car passed by, spooking her into leaving. The next morning, a second official notice arrived from the HOA. This one was more direct. "Final warning. Remove unauthorized surveillance equipment within 7 days. It cited additional regulations and threatened increased fines of $250 per day plus potential legal action. Unlike the previous letter, this one included a direct quote from the bylaws. No alterations to the external appearance of residences without prior board approval. I decided it was time for my first formal response. I drafted a letter addressing the HOA board. In careful, measured language, I cited State Law 38.57, which explicitly protected homeowners' rights to install security devices on their own property. I quoted the recent Supreme Court case of Martindale v. Sunridge Estates, which established that HOAs could not forbid reasonable security measures. I attached photographs showing the limited field of view of my camera, proving it captured only my own property. I also noted the pattern of harassment I had experienced, including screenshots from the neighborhood chat, photos of their protest, and images from my camera showing Karen's late-night visits. I concluded by requesting a formal hearing with the full board, as was my right under their own bylaws, Section 12.3. I hand-delivered copies to each board member's home, ensuring they could not claim they never received it. That evening, my phone rang. It was local law enforcement. Mr. Redacted, this is Officer Mendez with the Oak Ridge Police Department. We received a complaint about harassment from one of your neighbors. Are you available to discuss this matter? I invited the officers to my home. Officers Mendez and Rivera arrived 20 minutes later. They were professional but clearly expecting a typical neighbor dispute. I offered them seats in my living room. We received a complaint from a Ms. Williams claiming you have been using surveillance equipment to monitor her movements and intimidate her, Officer Mendez explained. She says you refused to comply with community guidelines and have been targeting her specifically. I nodded calmly. I understand. Before we discuss this further, I would like to show you some documentation. For the next 15 minutes, I walked them through my evidence file. The officer's expressions shifted from polite attention to raised eyebrows to barely concealed amusement as they reviewed Karen's escalating behavior. So you're saying she filed a police report against you because you have a doorbell camera, while she's been photographing your house at night and leaving threatening notes? Officer Rivera clarified. That is correct, I confirmed. And as you can see from these screenshots, my camera captures only my property, not hers or anyone else's. Officer Mendez flipped through the HOA notices. Have you considered filing a harassment complaint? Not at this time, I replied. I am handling this through proper channels first. I believe there are larger issues within the HOA that need addressing. As they prepared to leave, Officer Mendez paused. Just out of curiosity, what do you do for a living, sir? I smiled slightly. I am the head of security operations for Winston Private Estates Management. We handle security for high-value residential communities across 3 states. Both officers looked at me for a moment, then Officer Rivera chuckled. Ms. Williams might have picked the wrong doorbell to fight about. That remains to be seen, I said politely as I showed them out. That night, I finalized my strategy. Karen's connections to the HOA president and her unofficial enforcement role suggested deeper problems within the organization. This was no longer about defending my right to basic security. It was about exposing a system that allowed personal vendettas to masquerade as rule enforcement. I would need to attend the next HOA meeting in person. The community center buzzed with quiet conversation as residents filed in for the monthly HOA meeting. I arrived 15 minutes early, selecting a seat near the back where I could observe the entire room. Karen was already there, stationed near the front, surrounded by her usual supporters. She noticed me immediately, whispering urgently to a gray-haired man I recognized as Thomas Harrington, the HOA president. I dressed conservatively in a dark suit, not to intimidate, but to project the quiet competence I had cultivated over decades in private security. Several neighbors glanced my way, clearly recognizing me as the subject of recent gossip. I nodded politely to each, maintaining a neutral expression. The meeting began with standard procedures: minutes approval, treasurer's report, landscape committee updates. I listened attentively, noting how Harrington deferred to Karen on multiple occasions despite her lacking any official executive role. When the agenda reached new business, Karen raised her hand immediately. Harrington acknowledged her with obvious familiarity. I would like to address the ongoing surveillance issue on Maple Drive, she announced, not looking in my direction but making it abundantly clear who she meant. Despite official notices, the violation continues. I propose we move directly to enforcement action, including maximum daily fines. Harrington nodded. Thank you, Karen. The board has reviewed this situation and agrees that. Excuse me, I interrupted, my voice calm but carrying clearly through the room. I believe as the homeowner in question, I should have the opportunity to address these claims before any vote occurs. The room fell silent. Karen turned to stare at me, her expression a mixture of indignation and surprise that I had actually spoken up publicly. Harrington cleared his throat. We typically handle violations through written communications, not open discussion. According to Section 12.3 of the bylaws, any homeowner facing potential penalties has the right to address the board at a public meeting before action is taken, I stated. I am exercising that right now. A murmur ran through the crowd. Someone toward the front whispered loudly enough for all to hear, "He knows the bylaws better than they do." Harrington reluctantly gestured for me to speak. I stood and walked calmly to the front of the room, bringing with me a single folder of documents. Good evening. For those I have not had the pleasure of meeting, my name is redacted. I moved here seeking the community and security that Oak Ridge Estates advertises to prospective homeowners. I spoke evenly, making eye contact with various residents around the room. The issue being discussed concerns my doorbell camera, which I installed as a basic security measure, as have millions of American homeowners. I have been accused of violating Section 7.4 regarding exterior modifications. I opened my folder and removed a printed copy of the bylaw in question. Section 7.4 specifically addresses structural modifications that significantly alter the architectural appearance of the home. A doorbell camera, no larger than a deck of cards, hardly constitutes a significant alteration. Karen interjected, "It is not about the size, it is about the surveillance." I nodded acknowledgement, a fair concern, which is why I took the time to diagram exactly what my camera captures. I displayed a printout showing the camera's field of view, which clearly included only my porch and walkway. As you can see, this device captures no footage of any neighboring property. This is consistent with State Law 38.57, which explicitly protects homeowners' rights to reasonable security measures. I paused, allowing this information to sink in. Then, almost casually, I added, "In my 20 years as head of security operations for private residential communities, I have never encountered an HOA that prohibited standard doorbell cameras. In fact, most security experts recommend them as part of basic home protection." The reaction was immediate. Whispers erupted throughout the room. Karen's expression froze. Harrington shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "You work in security?" one resident asked. "I manage security operations for Winston Private Estates Management," I confirmed. "We oversee security for high-value communities across 3 states, including several that are significantly more exclusive than Oak Ridge." This was not meant as an insult, simply a statement of fact, but I noted several board members exchanging concerned glances. While researching this issue, I continued, I took the opportunity to review our HOA's governance structure. I noticed several inconsistencies that concern me. I turned directly to the board. For instance, I cannot find any record of when the last board election was held. According to state law, HOAs must hold open elections at least every 2 years. The most recent minutes mentioning elections are from 2019. The room grew very quiet. Additionally, I would like to formally request a review of the HOA financial records for the past 3 years. As a dues-paying member, I have the legal right to examine how our funds are being allocated. Karen stood abruptly. "This is completely inappropriate. We are discussing your violation, not HOA procedures." Thomas Harrington raised his hand to silence her, his expression now serious. "What exactly are you implying?" I maintained a professional tone. "I am not implying anything. I am exercising my rights as a homeowner to ensure our community is being governed transparently and legally. If there is nothing irregular in the HOA's operations, then my review will only confirm that." A woman in the second row raised her hand. "I would also like to see those financial records. We have had 3 special assessments in 2 years. An older gentleman nodded. And when was the last time we voted for board positions? I cannot recall receiving a ballot. The meeting was slipping out of Harrington's control. Corinne's face had flushed deep red. "This is outrageous," she sputtered. "He is trying to distract from his own violations." "Actually," I responded calmly, "I am attempting to ensure that all homeowners are treated equally under clearly established rules. If the board cannot produce records of proper elections or financial transparency, I will have no choice but to file a formal complaint with the State Housing Authority." The threat hung in the air. Everyone in the room understood the implications. State investigations of HOAs typically ended badly for entrenched board members. "Perhaps," I suggested into the silence, "we should table the discussion of my doorbell camera until after we have addressed these more pressing governance concerns." Thomas Harrington cleared his throat. "That seems reasonable. We will postpone any action regarding Mr. Redacted's camera pending further review." As I returned to my seat, I noticed something had changed in the room. Residents were looking at me differently, not with suspicion, but with something approaching respect, and in some cases, hope. The war was not over, but the battlefield had just dramatically shifted. The first text message arrived 3 days after the HOA meeting. "This is Janet from Cedar Lane. Can we talk privately?" Similar messages followed over the next week. Neighbors who had previously avoided eye contact now sought me out, usually when Corinne was not around. We spoke in quiet conversations on walking paths, in brief exchanges at the community mailboxes, or through private messages away from the neighborhood group chat. Each interaction revealed another thread in the tapestry of Corinne's influence over Oakridge Estates. Janet explained how her request to install a small garden trellis had been repeatedly denied, while Corinne's friend 3 doors down had built an elaborate pergola without apparent permission. Michael and David from Willow Street described receiving violation notices within days of voting against Corinne's preferred candidate for the landscape committee. Elderly Mrs. Chandler confessed that she paid her grandson to mow her lawn twice weekly because Corinne had reported her to the board 3 times for unsightly grass length. The most valuable information came from Robert, a former board member who had resigned the previous year. We met at a coffee shop 10 miles from the neighborhood to ensure privacy. "It started small," he explained, stirring his coffee nervously. "Thomas and Corinne were friends before he became president. Nothing wrong with that. But then she started getting special treatment. Her renovation requests got fast-tracked. Her complaints jumped to the top of the agenda." He slid a thumb drive across the table. "I kept copies of board emails from my tenure. Pay attention to the landscaping contracts from spring 2023. The company that got the bid is owned by Corinne's brother-in-law. They charge 40% above market rate." That evening, I reviewed the files Robert had provided. The evidence was damning. Email threads showed Corinne pressuring board members to approve her friends' requests while finding technical reasons to deny others. Financial documents revealed questionable spending patterns, excessive payments to specific vendors, unexplained administrative fees, and special projects that benefited primarily properties near Corinne and Thomas's homes. Most concerning were the complaint records. Corinne had filed over 60 formal complaints against neighbors in the past year alone. Many were for minor or subjective issues like unsightly holiday decorations or inappropriate wind chimes. The board had acted on nearly all of them, issuing warnings and fines that appeared wildly disproportionate to the alleged violations. I compiled everything into a comprehensive report, organizing evidence chronologically and by category of misconduct. The pattern was clear. Corinne had effectively weaponized the HOA against anyone who challenged her authority or aesthetic preferences. Meanwhile, her allies received preferential treatment and financial benefits. 2 weeks after the HOA meeting, a certified letter arrived from Harrison and White, attorneys at law. The letterhead looked impressive, but a quick online search revealed a small general practice firm with no significant experience in property law. The message was a thinly veiled threat, suggesting I was interfering with the legitimate operations of a legally established homeowners association and could face significant liability. I responded with a brief, professional email directly to the attorney listed on the letterhead. I attached selected portions of my evidence file along with citations of relevant state statutes, regarding HOA governance requirements. My closing paragraph was simple. As you consider your continued representation in this matter, please be advised that any legal proceedings would necessarily involve discovery of all HOA records and communications. My preliminary research suggests this would not be advantageous to your client. No further communication came from the law firm. Karen, however, was not finished. That weekend, a printed flyer appeared in every mailbox in Oak Ridge Estates. It warned of a dangerous individual who had infiltrated our community and was attempting to destabilize our property values through baseless accusations. While it did not name me directly, the implication was unmistakable. This desperate escalation told me everything I needed to know. Karen was losing control, and she knew it. Board members had stopped returning her calls. Neighbors were speaking openly about governance concerns. The carefully constructed hierarchy she had built was crumbling. The next board meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday. It was time for the final phase of my strategy. The community center was filled beyond capacity. Word had spread that something significant would happen at the meeting, drawing residents who had not attended in years. Extra chairs were brought in to accommodate the crowd. Karen and Thomas Harrington sat at the board table, whispering urgently to each other as people filed in. I arrived exactly on time, carrying a leather portfolio containing my complete documentation. Several neighbors nodded to me or offered small smiles of encouragement. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation. Thomas Harrington called the meeting to order, his usual confidence noticeably diminished. He moved quickly through the standard agenda items, his eyes darting nervously to the new business section where my name was listed. Karen sat rigidly beside him, her expression tightly controlled. When my turn came, Harrington cleared his throat. Next item is a presentation by Mr. Redacted regarding community governance concerns. You have requested 10 minutes. Karen immediately interrupted. Point of order. Mr. Redacted has been disruptive at previous meetings. I move to limit his time to 3 minutes. A voice called from the audience, "Let him speak." Others joined in with murmurs of agreement. Harrington's gavel came down weakly. Order, please. The agenda allows 10 minutes and we will stick to that. I approached the podium calmly, placing my portfolio on the surface. The room fell silent. Thank you for this opportunity, I began. I would like to start with a simple question. How many of you have received violation notices that seemed unfair or arbitrary? Nearly half the hands in the room went up. How many of you have been afraid to request home improvements because you feared rejection for unclear reasons? More hands. And how many of you know exactly who decides which rules get enforced and against whom? Every eye in the room turned toward Karen. For the past 2 months, I have documented a pattern of selective enforcement, financial irregularities, and procedural violations within our HOA. Today, I am not here to complain about my doorbell camera. I am here to address the systematic abuse of power that affects every homeowner in Oak Ridge Estates. I opened my portfolio and began presenting evidence methodically. I showed slides of email exchanges where Karen directed board members which homeowners to target. I displayed financial records highlighting the inflated landscaping contracts awarded to her brother-in-law's company. I presented a statistical analysis of complaint patterns, demonstrating how residents who opposed Karen at meetings subsequently received violation notices at 4 times the community average. Section 718.122(4) of the State Property Code explicitly prohibits HOAs from using association resources to harass or retaliate against homeowners, I explained. The evidence suggests this has become standard practice here. The room remained silent, absorbing each revelation. Karen's face had lost all color. Thomas Harrington stared down at the table. Furthermore, I continued, state law requires HOA board elections every 2 years, with proper notice to all members and verifiable voting procedures. The last documented election in Oak Ridge was nearly 4 years ago. A board member I had not spoken with previously, a retired accountant named Patricia, suddenly stood up. I have been requesting financial audit information for months. As treasurer, I am supposed to have full access to all accounts, but I have repeatedly been told certain records are unavailable or being processed. Her public statement sent a ripple through the crowd. This was unexpected support from within the board itself. Thomas Harrington interrupted, his voice strained. These are serious allegations that require proper investigation. I suggest we form a committee to review. With respect, Mr. President, I interjected, this is not a matter for another committee. This is a matter of legal compliance. I have already prepared a complete report for submission to the State Housing Authority. However, I preferred to address these issues internally first, giving the board an opportunity to take corrective action. The implication was clear. Cooperate now or face official investigation. What exactly are you proposing? Harrington asked, his authority visibly crumbling. First, immediate suspension of all pending violation notices and fines until a proper review can be conducted by an independent party. Second, a forensic audit of HOA finances for the past 3 years. Third, properly noticed elections for all board positions within 60 days, supervised by neutral observers. Karen finally exploded. This is a hostile takeover. He has been here 2 months and thinks he can dictate how our community operates. An elderly gentleman in the front row stood up. I have lived here 17 years, and I support everything he just said. Others joined in with similar declarations. The mood in the room had shifted decisively. Thomas Harrington looked around at the faces of his neighbors, then down at his gavel. After a long moment, he spoke quietly. In light of these concerns and the community's response, I am tendering my resignation as board president, effective immediately. A collective gasp filled the room. Karen turned to him in shock. Tom, you cannot. It is done, Karen, he said, pushing his chair back and standing. Patricia, as treasurer, you have seniority. The meeting is yours. He walked out without another word, leaving stunned silence in his wake. Patricia, looking both surprised and determined, took the center seat. I think we need an emergency vote on how to proceed. Karen started gathering her papers. This meeting is a farce. I will not participate in this. Ms. Williams, I said clearly, leaving now could be interpreted as abandonment of duties under Section 8.7 of the bylaws, which would result in immediate removal from your position. I suggest you stay and participate in the democratic process. She froze, then slowly sat back down, her kingdom visibly crumbling around her. Patricia called for votes on each of my proposed actions. Each passed overwhelmingly. As the meeting concluded, she approached me directly. We need people with your expertise on the board, she said quietly. Would you consider running in the special election? I smiled. I would be honored to serve the community properly. As residents filed out, many stopped to shake my hand or thank me. Karen sat alone at the board table, abandoned by her former allies, watching as her carefully constructed fiefdom dissolved in a single evening. The moving truck arrived on a Tuesday morning, 3 months after the board meeting that changed everything. Karen supervised the loading of her furniture with rigid efficiency, speaking only to the movers and ignoring the curious glances from neighbors. By afternoon, her house stood empty, a for sale sign already planted in the front yard. No one organized a farewell gathering. No sympathy cards circulated for signatures. Karen Williams left Oak Ridge Estates as she had ruled it, alone. The changes in the community were immediate and profound. The new board, elected through a properly monitored process, began by rescinding all violation notices issued in the previous year, inviting homeowners to resubmit their cases if they believed legitimate issues existed. Fewer than 10% did so. The forensic audit revealed over $87,000 in questionable expenditures over 3 years, primarily through inflated contracts and unnecessary consulting fees paid to companies with connections to former board members. Legal proceedings were initiated to recover these funds, with the results still pending. Most significantly, the atmosphere throughout the neighborhood transformed. Front doors opened more frequently. Children played in yards without anxious parents watching for rule violations. At the first community cookout under new leadership, attendance was triple that of previous years. I did not seek a position on the permanent board, preferring instead to serve as a consultant on security and governance procedures. The doorbell camera that had sparked the entire conflict remained in place, now joined by similar devices on many homes throughout the community as residents embraced modern security practices without fear of selective enforcement. On a warm Saturday evening, 6 months after my arrival, I sat on my front porch watching neighbors stroll by. Many waved or called greetings. A family I had never spoken to during the Karen era stopped to ask advice about a smart lock system they were considering for their home. As the sun set over Oak Ridge Estates, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. The conflict had never really been about a doorbell camera. It had been about power, fear, and the corrosive effect of unchecked authority. Karen had created a system where neighbors lived in anxiety about arbitrary rules rather than in community with one another. My security background had given me the tools to document and expose the problem, but it was the collective courage of residents standing together that ultimately reclaimed their neighborhood. One person with a clipboard and arbitrary authority can terrorize an entire community, but only if that community remains silent. For those watching who might be facing their own HOA tyrants or neighborhood Karens, remember this: document everything. Know your rights. Build alliances quietly. Stay calm and professional even when provoked. And when the time comes to act, bring irrefutable evidence and the confidence to present it effectively. The greatest weapon against petty authoritarians is not anger or confrontation, but methodical exposure of their actions to those they claim to serve. No crown of self-importance can survive the bright light of transparency. My doorbell camera still records everyone who approaches my front door. But now, those recordings capture smiling neighbors, children delivering cookies, and a community that understands the difference between security and surveillance. Sometimes the best security system is not a camera or an alarm, but a neighborhood where people look out for each other instead of looking for violations. That is the real meaning of a secure community, and it is worth fighting for.